happy Star Wars Day. It is Friday, May 4th, and that, of course, means it is May the 4th be with you. But it's also Friday, and it's Free Friday Frights. This is Mark Leslie. I'm your host for Free Friday Frights, and both Barnaby and I are wearing our Star Wars shirts to help celebrate Star Wars Day, but I don't have a Star Wars story for you. What I have is a story called Active Reader, which is a bookstore story. Well, bookstores are one of the greatest places in the world, and I'm going to start off by doing a reading of the tale, which is relatively short, and then talk about the origin of it, and in particular, the origin of this particular paper-printed text. So without further ado, welcome to Free Friday Frights, and this is going to be Active Reader. Do you have an Active Reader card? Douglas smiled across the counter at the pretty young woman as she plopped a pile of paperbacks onto the cash desk. Her brow creased as she looked at him a moment. Then she spied the plastic blue card reader and the Noble Books logo of a lion sitting atop a stack of books, and recognition filled her eyes. Oh, the discount card. Of course, I always carry it with me. She dug into her wallet and produced the blue Noble Books Active Reader card. Douglas took her card, swiped it through the machine, and then scanned in her books. As he lifted each paperback over the scanner, he glanced quickly at the title and author. She has good taste in dark literature, he thought, recognizing some of the titles by Clegg, Campbell, Little, and Clark. Oh, Douglas said, The Darkest Part of the Woods. That's a good one. I just finished reading it myself. She smiled at him. I love all of Campbell's writing, both the novels and the short fiction. UK's finest horror author. She nodded enthusiastically. He pointed at the next book in her pile. So, have you read other books by this author? Carol Weeks? Oh, yes, I've read a couple of hers. She's becoming one of my favorites. He grinned proudly. Her writing is a real gift to the horror genre. The girl nodded, her blonde curly hair bouncing as he continued to scan the books in. Between books, he kept glancing back up at her, noticing the soft blue of her eyes with the subtle green tint. Not only was she very attractive, with sparkling, brilliant eyes, but she was also a lover of books and of horror. That old, familiar, nervous tingling flitted about his stomach, and he found himself tongue-tied, unsure of what to say next. Attractive women didn't do that to him, but an attractive woman with sparkling eyes who loved to read horror sent him into a tailspin. At the end of the transaction, he announced the total, she paid it, and he handed her the books in a Noble Books bag and wished her a fond farewell. As she said goodbye and walked away from the cash desk, Douglas keyed in the code that would reprint the last receipt and then slid the next cashier sign onto the desk in front of his register. Carrie, Douglas said to the pimply-faced teen working 2 registers to his left, I'll be in my office if anyone needs me. With that said, he tore off the duplicated receipt and walked away against the background of the Friday night bustling crowd of avid readers, browsers, and coffeehouse regulars. Closing the door to leave the sounds of the crowd behind him, he glanced down at the receipt. The top of it read, Active Reader Member 5552-7589. Douglas fiddled with his Noble Books tie and sat down at the computer. He entered the general access password and then flipped around on the drop-down menu desktop environment until he highlighted the customer menu. He pressed the enter key, then typed the management level password, which brought him to the customer database. He typed old in the command line and a small window opened, allowing him to enter an 8-digit Noble Books Active Reader number. He entered her number. After a moment, a name, address, and phone number appeared on the screen. Kim Meadows, Douglas said, reading the customer's name aloud. Then his eyes scanned down to the part of the screen which showed, in detail, all of this particular customer's purchases. The titles, the quantity, the time of day, where she bought them, how she paid for each purchase. Of course, the database didn't yet include the book she had just purchased. That information was only updated once per day on a national level, once the store closed and the computer uploaded that information to the main database at the Noble Books support office. He scrolled down the huge listing of books she had purchased. At both this location of Noble Books and the various locations in other parts of the state, mumbling to himself, "You're quite the active reader, Ms. Meadows." There was a long listing of horror titles, along with thrillers and mysteries. It appeared that Ms. Meadows favored intense thriller-type reading. It was no wonder she became a fan of Carol Weekes' novels. Carol Weekes was one of the select few authors that Douglas just had to collect in every single format. She was a talented thriller horror writer who had worked her way up through the small press and onto the tail end of the bestseller lists. Her precise description of details was matched only by her ability to aggressively hammer out characters and a plot that begged you to read for more. From the first time he discovered her first novel, Walter's Crossing, Douglas had been a genuine and eager fan, collecting all of her works, no matter if they were small press releases or big publishing house titles. Finally, after a couple of pages of listings, he found a few titles by Carol Weekes. And there, one of the first purchases Kim Meadows had made on her card almost 2 years ago, at the other Noble Books location in the city, was the title he'd been looking for. It Creeps Up on You. "Excellent," Douglas said, smiling and spinning the office chair around. It Creeps Up on You was a collection of stories Carol Weekes had published midway through her career. It contained a selection of previously unpublished works alongside stories that had seen print decades earlier. It was, in Douglas's opinion, the ultimate collection that could be known as the essence of Weekes' writing career, illustrating her as a wicked mystic of the written word. It contained stories filled with hope, laughter, horror, bitter darkness, and believable characters. Sure, the title story and some of the others included were stories that Weekes had penned with other authors, but those collaborations only illustrated her unique ability to mesh her own incredible storytelling voice with various other writing talents. Douglas punched the button that would print the screen he was on. "My collection can now become complete," he said, and a warm, fuzzy feeling filled his chest, the same way the tingling had filled his stomach when he had been looking Kim Meadows in the eyes. Scene break. Kim Meadows sat curled in a big comfy chair by the window with a down-filled quilt pulled over her. One foot, dressed in a knee-high white sock, dangled out from under the quilt, resting just above where her cat Ginger lay sleeping. On the table beside her, a steaming mug of lemon tea. Roxy Music's Avalon unobtrusively filled the room for the stereo across the room that was dwarfed by huge, overflowing bookcases on either side. She was enraptured in the paperback she had picked up earlier in the week, a thriller by author Michael Slade. She'd never read Slade before, but had caught sight of the display that told her if she liked Tammy Hogue, she might like Michael Slade. She was so enthralled in the novel that she didn't hear the front door to her apartment unlatch itself, nor did she hear the door slowly open and then close. The only indication that something strange was going on would have been when Ginger sat up for a moment, tilted her head, sniffed the air, then put her head back down on her paws. With her nose buried in the paperback and not noticing Ginger, Kim continued to read. She didn't notice the shadow cast upon the wall to her left, nor did she hear the quiet footsteps approaching her from behind. She did, however, feel the tip of the blade as it slunk slowly into the side of her neck, producing a thin stream of blood. She turned her head to see a face she recognized, but couldn't quite place. Douglas smiled at her. "I need you to tell me something," he said. She nodded. "Have you read everything you bought by Carol Weekes?" Her eyes widened as she realized where she recognized him from. "Have you?" She nodded vigorously. "Have you read It Creeps Up on You?" She nodded again. "All of it?" She grimaced and coughed a small bubble of blood between her lips. "Did you read all of it?" She nodded, and he pulled the blade across her throat. She gurgled something unintelligible and dropped the paperback onto her lap. A fresh stream of crimson flowed down her chest and onto the paperback as Douglas felt himself harden in anticipation. He sighed. He hadn't read a Michael Slade novel yet. Too bad, he thought vaguely. This particular one had been ruined by blood. But it looked intriguing, Perhaps the next day he would seek out a clean, unbloodied copy off of the store shelves and give it a read. He sighed aloud and then proceeded to get what he had come for. Ginger let out a soft mewling and sauntered off to the bedroom. Scene break. Returning to his home, Douglas poured himself a tall glass of scotch with slivers of ice and proceeded to head upstairs into his den. It was time to add his latest addition to the collection. He stood in the entranceway to the den, flicked on a switch, and admired how the tiny display lights he's installed cast a soft glow onto the covers of the eclectic first edition anthology books. Even more exciting was the small glass display case filled with formaldehyde resting in front of each book. Several of the display cases, the ones in front of Tales of Mystery and Imagination by Edgar Allan Poe, Alone with the Horrors by Ramsey Campbell, A Good Secret Place by Richard Lehman, Death Drives a Semi by Edo van Belkom, and The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. They all had something floating in them already. But the one in front of Carol Weeks's It Creeps Up on You was empty. Douglas stepped forward, reached into his pocket, and pulled out the plastic baggie containing Kim Meadows' eyeballs. Gingerly, he lifted them out of the baggie and placed them in the formaldehyde of the glass case in front of the book. Then he smiled a vacant smile as he stood there and sighed, thinking about the years of effort and patience that had brought this collection together. As the memories ran through his head, he inadvertently felt himself hardening again. The excitement began to dwindle as he realized that with this collection complete, he was again at another crossroads. What would he collect next? This is not the time to think about it, he told himself, and went back to admiring his collection in a twisted devotion. After a few minutes of appreciating the completeness that this new addition added to the collection and sipping at his scotch, he flicked the lights off and left the room. From the den, he wandered over to the guest bedroom and stood there in the doorway. From the darkness within, he could make out the shape of his mother, who lay in the bed. As he stood looking at her, he could almost hear the quiet, snore-like breaths she used to make when she was alive and sleeping. The dimness of the room prevented him from being able to see her waxy, plastic-like skin and the fact that her chest was not rising and falling with breath. Taxidermy was a wonderfully useful craft. The human skin just didn't hold up the way animal pelts did. His eyes began to mist over, thinking about the tragedy that had befallen the woman her entire life and how she fought back so valiantly, constantly challenging destiny. It was such a shame she had lost her sight when Douglas had been so young. Since he was a child and could put together the words "See Jack Run," she had asked that he read to her. He had quickly become an avid reader, reading her anything from the daily paper to the pocketbooks he could pick up at the corner store for a mere dime. Even though the traditional roles had been reversed, reading to his mother had been one of the few pleasures Douglas had known and cherished. So when she died almost 5 years ago, he couldn't do without reading to her. And as he'd grown, his taste in fiction had taken a darker turn. Perhaps it was reading such things that gave him the idea, but he found that performing some tasks taken from books on taxidermy meant that he could keep his mother with him longer and share with her even more of the books he loved to read. The thought of it all made him long for the comfort he'd felt when he recalled one of his very first memories. He was a child, very young, and had trouble sleeping in the middle of the night. His mother, still able to see back then, this memory took place before she lost her vision. She crawled into bed with him with a storybook and read to him until he relaxed and fell asleep again. He was tired and hadn't planned on doing any reading tonight, but the feeling of insecurity, wondering what he would do now that his collection was complete, was just too strong. Decisively, he turned and went back to the den to retrieve the newly acquired eyeballs and the Weeks collection. Then he returned to his mother's bedroom and flicked on the lights to reveal the dead body of a woman who, except for the waxen facial features and the vacant eye sockets, appeared to be sleeping. He gently inserted Kim's eyeballs into the empty eye sockets of his mother's face, slipped beneath the covers to cuddle up beside her, and thumbed the book open to the first page. It Creeps Up on You, he read to her in a soft, almost motherly voice, by Carol Weeks. Well, that is Active Reader, which was a horror story that I had originally had published in an online magazine called Dissections, a journal of online horror. And there's a few elements of the story that were kind of Easter eggs for my readers, but also my own ode to authors I admired and respected. So the collection that Douglas has are a bunch of amazing titles by fantastic authors that I highly recommend. Some of them may not be in print anymore, like Ado van Belkom's Death Drives a Semi. And Carol Weeks is a friend of mine who I believe is a brilliantly talented writer, and everyone should try and get out and read anything they can from Carol, short stories, novels, whatever. Walter's Crossing was her first published novel. She's published a book with Michael Kelly as well called Ouroboros. Fantastic. And It Creeps Up on You, I actually made that up because that was the name of a short story Carol and I wrote together, and that was sort of a little bit of an Easter egg. Now, Active Reader was written back when I was shortly after I stopped working for Chapters Indigo, which is a major book chain here in Canada, and there was an Avid Reader card. And I knew how the Avid Reader card worked. I knew the way that the loyalty program worked. And the idea is, obviously, when you buy things, it scans them so that it can make recommendations for other books that you might like, etc. But I always wondered what might happen if that data got into the wrong hands. What would happen if the data got into the hands of a psycho killer who believed that anyone who reads certain novels should be killed because they're just evil people? And I thought, okay, this is a guy who's obsessed, maybe he's a religious fanatic, and he wants to kill anyone who reads horror novels. And that's how the story started off. And then as the story progressed, I thought, nah, it's a little bit too much, and I want to kind of see it more from his point of view. So what I did is I modified it to a collector. I came up with a background for Douglas, and then of course I thought it would be even more evil and even more twisted to have him collecting the eyeballs of people who've read those books as part of his absurd collection. That story was republished in my short story collection, One Hand Screaming. No, it wasn't published in my short story collection, One Hand Screaming, because that came out in 2004, and I believe this was 2008 or 2009 when I wrote the story. But what had happened is in 2009, I was working at the bookstore at McMaster University, and we had an espresso book machine. So for those of you who don't know what an espresso book machine is it's a large machine that kind of looks like 2 or 3 massive, large-scale photocopiers attached together. I think there's about 150 in the world right now, but at the time, at the bookstore at McMaster, we had purchased one for $174,000 US. We were the second location in Canada to have one. The University of Alberta bookstore was the first, and McMaster University bookstore was the second. We were the 9th in the world to have one of these machines. And what this machine would do is it could print and bind a trade paperback in about 15 minutes right in the store from a digital file. So the same sort of files that you would use to create a print book through regular printing, or to upload to CreateSpace or Ingram Spark for any authors who are listening to create your print-on-demand title. But this was in the store. You would load the cover file, you would load the interior file, you would print it, it would print, bind, and then it would trim, because it was a full-sized pages that it would do it on. And it would trim it off, spit it out of the machine, kind of like a vending machine. And so when we got the machine, we had access to files. We had access to hundreds of thousands of public domain titles, which we could pull off the online catalog. We would be able to create our own titles, which is how I originally got involved heavily in self-publishing, even though I initially self-published back in 2004. But what I had done is I didn't want to continue to because you had to do a lot of testing, and you try different types of paper and things like that to get things to work. And I didn't want to test with 300-page books. So and then rather than trying to get permission from someone to use a smaller book, I thought I'll take 3 of my stories. And so 3 short stories were Active Reader, which was this story, Browsers, which is another bookstore story, and Distractions, which is a story about a writer with a really bad case of writer's block. And I put them all together and thought, okay, I'll call the collection Active Reader and Other Cautionary Tales from the Book World. Slapped together a very, obviously not very professional looking, but cover, which is based on a snapshot of my bookshelves. Put it on the back, and this, because the bookstore was called Titles, we called the business Titles on Demand, because we had access to print books on demand. Very simple. Put it together, and then that way I had about a 50-page book that I could quickly crank out of the machine, especially for testing, or even if people wanted a demo. That way I wasn't wasting as much paper. Flash forward just a year or two later, and I was in Toronto, and Mark Coker, the founder of Smashwords, which is an ebook company that was, one of the very first data aggregators to allow you to get your books published to Amazon and Kobo and to Apple, iBooks, and Nook, etc. Mark Coker was on stage. I was there doing a presentation about print on demand and the Espresso book machine, and Mark Coker was there as another guest doing a talk about Smashwords. And I went, oh, that's cool. So I signed up as an author for a Smashwords account, uploaded my book, One Hand Screaming, and then I also decided I would take the Active Reader book and load that there as a test, because I wanted to try different files. And so this may be one of the only print copies I have of this book anymore, and I realized only as I was putting this together for Free Friday Frights that I don't actually have this available in print anymore. It's available in ebook on all the retailers. And last year, in 2017, I used Findaway Voices, which is an audiobook company that allows you the ability to create audiobooks or to upload audiobooks if you have the rights to them already, and distribute them to Audible and iTunes and a whole bunch of other audiobook retail sites. And Eric Brian Moore was the narrator who did the book for me. I obviously I have a different cover for the ebook that was a more professionally produced cover rather than the one I had just slapped together. And so the audiobook has that cover as well. And Eric was an amazing performer. Actually, just this morning, he sent me, or has confirmed that he's completed recording the 10,000 word short story, A Murder of Scarecrows, which I had written and self-published just as a standalone ebook. But I wanted to do an audiobook version of that, because it's about an hour long, like 56 minutes for the full story. And Eric's such an amazingly talented reader that I wanted him again, so I went back to Findaway Voices and specifically requested Eric, and I just got that back, so that'll be coming out soon. But for any of you who may be interested in hearing a way better reading of the story than the one I did by Eric, as well as Browsers and Distractions, as well as my author notes, you can email me, mark@markleslie.ca. I still have a handful of codes from Audible for Audible US or Audible UK. So let me know what store you normally shop at, if it's Audible US or Audible UK. And let me know that you're interested. And I can give you a code so you can download Active Reader for free through Audible. And again, you don't need to have any particular device other than a computer or the free Audible app on your iPhone or your Android device, etc. And then that way you can enjoy 2 more stories for free, as well as a way better version of that particular story. So that is this Friday, May 4th edition of Free Friday Frights. If you want to read the story itself, you can go to markleslie.ca/freefridayfrights. It should be up for another 18 or 20 hours. I posted it sometime last night, Thursday night, and won't take it down probably till mid-morning on Saturday in the Eastern time zone where I am. So if you want to actually read it, because that's a better experience for you than audio, you've got that option. It is available in the ebook Active Reader with the 2 other stories. But if you want a free audio version, email me. I'd be happy to send you a code. In any case, that is the end of this particular Free Friday Frights. This is Mark Leslie, every Friday bringing you either a free short story or a free true tales of ghosts. Because if you're a fiction reader, you'll like the alternate Fridays. And if you're a nonfiction paranormal ghost kind of person, you'll enjoy those other Fridays, trying to make sure that there's something for everyone who likes the Mark Leslie style of writing. I hope you have a wonderful Star Wars May the 4th day. Hope you have a fantastic weekend wherever you are, and I wish you plenty of great reading and maybe some fun chills this weekend. Take care, and we will see you next Friday.